Welcome to Check 6, where today we look at the turbulent last few days for aviation in the Middle East. Joining me to discuss Operation Epic Fury, or Operation Roaring Lion if you prefer, is Steve Trimble, Aviation Week's senior Pentagon editor. And to talk about what I call Operation Grounded Gulf Hubs is Jens Flottau, our executive editor for commercial air transport. I'm Robert Wall, Aviation Week's executive editor for Defense and Space, and your host for today. And before we get started, and I pass the word to my more knowledgeable colleagues, let me give a brief rapid-fire recap, really, of what transpired over the last few days, in case you were, I don't know where, just asleep for the week. Anyway, so last few weeks, the U.S. has flowed combat forces to the Middle East, massed fighters, tankers, intelligence assets, all in the region in anticipation of something maybe happening. The go-ahead came from the White House on Friday, February 27th, and combat operations began in earnest on the morning locally, February 28th. And the timing is interesting, and I'm sure Steve will get into that at some point on this call. In the ensuing hours, U.S. and Israel launched waves of airstrikes against Iranian air defenses, missile infrastructure, regime targets. Iran fired back, mainly ballistic missiles and drones, and airlines grounded flights across the region amid the mayhem. Israel managed to kill the Iranian supreme leader, and the U.S. and Israel together took out much of the military and intelligence apparatus that Iran has, at least from a personnel perspective. They achieved partial air superiority over Iran, including the capital Tehran. Israel got the first aircraft kill using an F-35, Qatar downed 2 Su-24s, and Kuwait shot down 3 U.S. F-15Es by mistake, and luckily all 6 crew members survived. As Iran fired back with drones and missiles, airports and other infrastructure was struck, and sadly, there were fatalities on the ground. And that's in short really where we find ourselves. Missile and drone firing has abated, but it continues. And as we record here on March 5th, Thursday, that's roughly the landscape. And now I'm going to probably hand it over to my colleagues to talk about this. And I'll start, because I've talked a lot about the military stuff, and so will Steve. I'll pass the word over first to Jens. Jens, looks like the biggest disruption in commercial air transport, at least from where I sit, since COVID. So what's your take? Where do we stand?
Yeah, I think that comparison is kind of fair. It's true. There are 2 elements there that allow for the comparison. One is the kind of the surprise factor. Obviously, no one prepared for this. The war came as a surprise to, I would say, to the Gulf states and the Gulf airlines in particular. I don't think people expected it so fast. They also didn't expect that Iran would retaliate in such an aggressive way, sending hundreds of drones every day, ballistic missiles, and so on. And the combined factors have really led to air travel temporarily stopping in some of the biggest hubs of the world. Dubai mainly, Abu Dhabi as well, Qatar, Doha. And even after, like 5 times into the war, many of them remain closed. Doha is closed. Nearby Bahrain airspace is closed. Dubai is somewhat open. UAE, I should say, is somewhat open. There are some repatriation flights. That also reminds me of the COVID years when that was kind of the only mode of transport, air transport, for some time. So it's a big mess for now. Of course, we can get into this a little later. The question is, what does for now mean? How long will it actually take? What are the structural consequences for long term? Will there be shifts in demand that are here to stay and not just temporary? Will the role of the Gulf hubs diminish because of this, as travelers lose confidence in flying through the region? Short term, of course, that's the case. The question's out there whether that'll be a permanent factor. And then are there broader implications? We've seen the oil price go up significantly over the last few days. And obviously, that's not great for any airline anywhere in the world. And for certain business models in particular, you might, it kind of sounds strange, but some of the most affected carriers in the airline industry could be low-cost carriers in a completely different part of the world because their business model is already under pressure, and the share of fuel costs in their total cost is already very high.
And you've had your first profit warning already. I mean,
we've had our first profit warning. Wizz Air is a particular case because, I mean, A, they are a low-cost carrier. B, they have significant network exposure to the region. So for them, they're kind of the worst case. So that they would be the first ones to issue a profit warning does come as no surprise whatsoever. But yes, they are kind of in the worst position you could imagine.
And before I bring in Steve here, one more question. I mean, obviously, we've had all sorts of airspace disruptions because of conflict zones now over the last few years. Russia airspace is still blocked. And we're kind of forgetting Afghanistan and Pakistan. We're fighting a little war on the side here that we've all ignored because this other thing is going on. If you're in Europe now, how do you get to Asia?
Yeah, I mean, you have to take huge detours. I mean, there are two corridors that are still open. One is kind of to the south, across Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and then across to India. And then the other corridor is in the north. I monitored a Fly Dubai flight from Dubai that actually left Dubai this morning. It was going to Central Asia, and it was what would have been a 2-hour flight normally turned out to be into a 5.5-hour flight. So huge disruption for short haul, definitely, but also the flows between Europe and Asia are heavily affected.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, let me bring you in here. So many ways to attack this. Both sides flying Shahid drones, basically. But from your perspective, big picture, what do you think is the biggest takeaway you would leave, or the point you'd impart to our audience here today?
Well, so, I mean, this is an air power-led regime change oriented mission. That is, I think, the most significant thing from our perspective is, very narrowly focused on aerospace and defense. That's not unprecedented. I mean, we've seen that before. We were just writing the feature on this and talking about how, we tried this with Operation Allied Force in 1999 and in the former Yugoslavia, and in 2011 with Libya. In both cases, there was substantial activity on the ground by local insurgents, adding pressure on those regimes, and those were, for the most part, I would say, tactically successful anyway. Yugoslavia probably more than Libya, because the chaos and carnage that followed internally after that regime change was, it's hard to call that a success. Although in the long term, it might still work out for them. But so that's what we're trying to do here. We opened with this decapitation strike in Tehran, which it kind of reminded me of the opening of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, where they did attempt a decapitation strike on a palace where they thought Saddam Hussein was still there, and it turned out either he wasn't or he left before they got the bombs on target. So it wasn't successful in that case, but it was successful here. And that opened the attacks, as Jens noted, to people's surprise. I woke up I think I was checking my cell phone at 4 a.m. on Saturday, just kind of waking up and seeing all these news alerts about Iranian ballistic missiles going the other way. I thought Iran preempted, because I wasn't aware that the U.S. had already started 3 hours before attacking Iran, U.S. and Israel. So that started everything. So far, if you are a Israeli or American fighter pilot or bomber pilot or UAS pilot, this has gone as well as could be imagined so far. Obviously, we lost 3 F-15s, but that was not due to anything the Iranians were doing to us, clearly, because that was a Kuwaiti friendly fire incident, which is still, we could talk about that later if you want, but that's still just a bizarre situation. Yeah, I think we'll probably find out more about what happened there later. But, there's just been almost no opposition from Iranian air defense at all. We've seen a couple fighters get shot down, two Su-24s. That's notable because despite this sort of omnipresent dominance over Iranian skies, two Su-24 bombers, really fighter bombers, actually got into Qatari airspace before they were shot down by ground-based air defenses in Qatar. And you wonder how that could have happened unless they were allowed to penetrate Qatari airspace and just let the Qataris deal with them. But otherwise, to see those aircraft get all the way out of Iran and into Qatari airspace was a bizarre failure. So that's kind of notable. We saw the F-35I flown by the Israelis shoot down a Yak-130. I don't think that's going to be the most proud achievement in the F-35's legacy, but it is the first time they've shot down another crewed aircraft versus a drone or a missile or something like that, or a cruise missile. So it's significant in that sense. Based on the video that they showed, I don't think the Yak-130 was even engaging the F-35 at the time.
But it gives the Israelis a good opportunity to keep the tradition alive of being the first to
That's right.
to shoot down an enemy fighter or an enemy aircraft with a U.S. fighter.
Yeah, they had the F-15 first, or it was the first F-16 and F-15 shoot downs in the Bekaa Valley in 1983. So, yeah, they do get there first a lot. And that also is why I'm so surprised those Su-24s got so far outside of Iran before they got shot down, because you have so many pilots out there, F-22 pilots, F-35 pilots, F-15 pilots, all trying to get that kill. And it's still baffling to me how that happened. I'd love to find out more about what happened there. And the other thing that still kind of baffles me, and we've talked about this a little bit this morning internally, is what happened to the 358 missile from Iran. It's not a very well-known phenomenon, but really in the past year, that 358 missile they have just bedeviled Israeli UAS like the Hermes 450 and Hermes 900 in their offensive air campaign against Hezbollah, and with U.S. UAS over Yemen. We lost a lot of MQ-9s, and a lot of them were reportedly credited to this 358 missile. But we haven't seen it at all.
Steve, I think maybe for some of our other audience, maybe explain what's so interesting about the 358, why it's such a distinct surface-to-air missile capability.
Yeah, so 358 actually started a trend. It appeared probably 5 or 6 years ago, and there's been more like that. The U.S. is something similar now, but it's a loitering, ground-launched surface-to-air missile. So it's rocket-boosted to altitude, and then a micro-turbojet on board takes over. So it just loiters in that airspace. It has a passive imaging infrared seeker on it with like a commercial FPGA, nothing too sophisticated. Has almost no infrared signature and a negligible radar cross section. So trying to find it if you're an aircraft in the skies is really difficult. Trying to defeat it because you can't jam it is also very difficult. And so the fact that, they can launch it from anywhere. They can launch it from their backyard. They can launch it from a runway. And the fact that we just haven't seen it at all, or seen that it's a problem. And of course, we don't know everything that's going on operationally. We don't know, but we haven't heard about any MQ-9 shoot downs. We haven't heard about any other types of UAS shoot downs. We know they're there. We've seen videos of them from the ground, of them flying over Tehran in broad daylight. So that's something that I really want to find out after this war ends, or hopefully even before then, about what happened there, because either we found a way to defeat that missile so that it can't use that seeker, or Iran ran out of them somehow, or something. But it's one of the mysteries of this so far.
Yeah. And for our audience, if you think of the Dune movie and the little bug that they use to go hunt people, that's basically what 358 is doing to aircraft. So, and Steve, stop rolling your eyes. Anyway, I want to bring Jens back in here, because you and I were chatting earlier too about and I want to talk about the airspace risk, and you were kind of remarking we were talking about how hard it will be to restore operations for commercial airlines with all this going on, with all these ballistic missiles still flying, and with all these drones still in the air, and the risk there.
You are the defense expert. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the ballistic that part is relatively well under control, or will soon be, at least. What worries me, and I guess what worries the airlines more, is these drones. It appears that Iran still has a large number of them, and they can launch them, you can literally hundreds a day across the Strait of Hormuz, and you have to really shoot them down so that they don't become a threat to civil aviation. But I can't fathom how you can do that. So really, until that's coming down to just very, very few incidents, I don't see how aviation, air transport, commercial aviation in the Gulf can resume. And really, that's a question that I would have for you guys: is how soon is that? Is it likely to happen? How is that going to come back under control, that situation, so to say?
Well, I don't have good news for the civil aviation sector in that way. It could end tomorrow, but it seems to me where Israel is going with this at the moment is trying to, and the U.S. to a certain extent as well, is trying to attrit or if you don't like that term, destroy Iran's military capacity as much as possible in the days or weeks left of this campaign. And the U.S. is also involved in that, but the Trump administration has been very clear that they're trying to find somebody in the Iranian government who can survive long enough, because Israel's second priority is killing everybody in the IRGC that would be considered a leader, while at the same time the Trump administration is trying to find somebody that they can strike a deal with, somebody that they can work with. Because the idea is, just like in Venezuela, we don't have to be friends, we don't have to like these people, we don't have to think that this is going to be great for Iranian democracy and the future of the Iranian people, but we just need somebody who will not try to actively kill people in other countries, right? And sponsor those who are doing that, like the Houthis or Hezbollah or something like that. And it seems to be the goal. I don't know how attainable that is. I don't know, even if they could find somebody who could survive long enough in the IRGC leadership to strike that bargain, if they're actually willing to do that at this point. If there's anybody who could actually consolidate control of what's left of that regime. So on the outside chance, there's still the possibility that all this pressure from the air, from air and missile strikes, will force the regime to collapse on itself. But then you see a scenario that's kind of like what we saw in Libya. You don't know who's going to take power after that. You can imagine a prolonged period of internal strife that might bleed over into other places, with still a lot of military capacity that I'm sure is still hidden and hoarded away in other places.
And not controlled, right? Even less controlled in a scenario like this, right? Yeah.
Even less controlled. So it's, that is also, that's a very nerve-wracking scenario. So, I mean, it's hard to see how a short-term solution to this, takes hold in a way that, we could just all stop and just give up and say, well, this is enough. But at that point, I think Iran still has a lot of military capability left, even if they're not showing it at the moment. And we'll just be back to this in a few months or a year.
And the Israelis and the U.S. have both kind of said in various points, they've built target lists over months. And they've built the target lists to be able to have targets to go for not days, but for weeks. So, I mean, they've hit a lot of their priority targets probably in the last 5 days, but clearly sounds like they have a ton more. And the Israelis, I guarantee you, have a ton more.
For commercial, I think that means, what we've seen happening over the past few days, or begun to see, is a bit of a shift in travel patterns, at least temporarily. It goes as far as Michael O'Leary, the CEO of Ryanair over here in Europe, saying that he's seeing demand for short haul increase because people choose to not travel long haul on their vacation, at least to Asia, through many of them would do through Dubai or another Gulf hub. But then for the long haul flows that are unavoidable, the people that really need to fly, how are they? Where are they going? And there are a few options actually, and I was thinking about who could benefit from this, structurally more long term. And I thought maybe it's Turkish. Turkish are building this huge hub in Istanbul already. They've got like 600 aircraft on firm order. I don't know how many. I forgot how many runways. I think 6 or 7. So they have plenty of space to expand. They've just beginning to penetrate some of the markets more in Southeast Asia. They're flying to Australia. They want to do non-stop flights to Australia fairly soon. So this is one airline that has the financial strength, the backing, the fleet, the infrastructure, and the geographic location to really, really benefit from this. Now, of course, on the other hand, once the situation in the Gulf stabilizes, I am 100% sure that anyone in the region will do everything to reinstate the position of Dubai, Doha, and so on. And the money is there too.
So what you're saying is, Jens, flights will be cheap once they come back.
Yes, that could be the case. Of course, we don't know what the oil price is doing by then, but we'll see. But it's really an interesting situation right now, and there's no question that there are shifts. Question is how long will they last?
I mean, I think Turkish Air, that's a really interesting thought that they could really pick up a lot of business out of this. But do you think any of the African carriers could, like Ethiopian?
Yeah, for some flows, for sure. I mean, Ethiopian is already heavily competing with the Gulf carriers for the African flows. But those flows are much smaller, of course. If you look at Europe to Asia traffic, Singapore might get some of it. It'll have definitely less competition from Gulf carriers, which has been hurting places like Kuala Lumpur, maybe Bangkok. When you went back, 20, 30 years ago, where would you connect en route to Australia? It would have been Singapore. It would have been, up to a lesser extent, KL or Bangkok. A lot of that traffic has gone elsewhere, but yeah. I think maybe there's some revival in those flows.
I will point out that we did on Wednesday have a Iranian ballistic missile fired at Turkey that a NATO vessel shot down. So the region, Turkey isn't that far away from the region. So so far, not clearly been the main target.
But yeah, one versus about 1,000 to Dubai or UAE in general. So.
It only takes one. Anyway, before we go, I wanted to ask each of you a bit to look at your crystal ball. And Jens, you kind of did that already with the airline, saying maybe there's a upside here for Turkish or even SQ. I'm reminded that about a decade ago, when the JCPOA was going on, the agreement with Iran to restrict its nuclear program that then got suspended, Iran may place some big orders for Airbus and Boeing planes, narrow bodies and wide bodies, hundreds of aircraft. And so is this, if we look past this week and this year, maybe, are Airbus and Boeing two of the winners out of this?
I mean, in a very, very optimistic case, scenario, I would say yes, they could be. I mean, if you look at Iran, I just looked at it this morning at our data, and just scanned through the average ages of the Iranian commercial aircraft fleet. It's almost all of the aircraft there, because of the trade embargoes, are 30 years or older, and are in desperate need of being replaced. Yes, but that would assume that there is going to be regime change, right? And frankly, maybe I'm too pessimistic, but I don't see that as of today. I think the more likely scenario is that some kind of ceasefire is going to be agreed on by the two parties with some new Iranian leadership, and then everything stays as is. As far as trade with Iran, is concerned. So I'm not that optimistic. On the other hand, will there be lower growth? Could be. I mean, if you're a Gulf carrier right now, do you really want even more aircraft? If this crisis drags on, and even in other regions, if costs go up, people will moderate their growth plans. Low-cost carriers, in particular, may be under pressure to lower capacity. Then they will need fewer aircraft. MRO, who knows? If this is becoming a long crisis, a long war, if oil price stays high or goes even higher, I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of questions, and I'm not so sure you can say that this is, Airbus and Boeing are necessarily benefiting from this. Right now, quite the opposite.
Yeah. So, Steve, similar question. I mean, as usual, the first day of war, defense stocks go up because people always think war is great for defense companies. It usually is not actually, but they moderate. But from your perspective, look out a bit beyond again this week and next. Where do you think there are opportunities? I'm not going to ask you if the Iranian Air Force will have to buy Super Tucanos or Gripens to replenish. So,
boy, that would be amazing, but I don't see that happening. So I guess I would say it's very significant that in the last couple of days we've consolidated control over the airspace. That means that the reliance on Tomahawks and JASSMs and those types of offensive long-range weapons that are very expensive and also very limited, you don't have to use them quite as much now. Now you can switch to things that are much more plentiful and less expensive, things like JDAMs, which are still precise, but they don't have rocket motors on them. They're gravity bombs sometimes with a wing kit that extends their range, but they're just falling, right? So that is significant from a stockpile standpoint on the offensive side. But where we're still going to struggle, I think, in the medium to long term, is replenishing the stockpile of air defense interceptors, whether it's Patriots, THAADs, Standard missiles, because we're not just talking about this operation. We're talking about two other major operations we've launched in the last couple of years that also required the use of those stockpiles. The air campaign against the Houthis last March and April. And, you could argue Midnight Hammer, but from the U.S. standpoint, that was pretty limited to just B-2s and massive ordnance penetrators, but then the Venezuela strikes as well. That would be where I would look at long term, is how do we replenish that stockpile? They've already got some framework agreements with the defense contractors to significantly expand production, but over a pretty long time, over about 7 years. And that still needs congressional approval. I don't think we're going to have much trouble getting that this year based on what's happened so far. So that could happen, but it's still going to take a while. And meanwhile, I mean, that's a significant thing because, this Iran thing could last a long time. Meanwhile, there's still other stuff going on in the world. Ukraine still needs interceptors. Taiwan is just sort of sitting out there going, hey, what about us too? So there's just a lot to think about, especially with those air defense interceptors, and to some extent offensive as well. So.
Well, on that happy note with the Taiwan reference, I shudder at the thought. Thank you. Thank you both. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us here. And also for Jens, your team as well, obviously. Thanks for the tireless work over the last few days. Obviously, Steve and your colleagues as well. For our audience, please check out everything we've been writing on aviationweek.com. If you haven't already been following, as you should have been, of course. And so we just want to say thanks again, and thanks for checking out us here on Check 6. And be sure, as usual, to check back soon for more online or on a future episode of Check 6. Thanks very much.